I gave birth to him. I fed him, raised him, protected him. I taught him right from wrong. But none of that mattered in the dark when I felt hands that should have never touched me that way. He was my son. And for years, I told myself it was a nightmare. But it wasn't. It was real. And it kept happening, night after night, until the day my husband walked in and saw what I could no longer hide. This is my story. Not for pity, but so no one else stays silent like I did. My name is Carol. I'm 67 years old, and for most of my life, I believed I was strong. I had survived poverty, illness, heartbreak, and a marriage that wasn't always kind. But nothing could have prepared me for what came later in life. Nothing prepared me for the betrayal that came from the one person I loved more than anything, my only son, Daniel. After he lost his job in the city, Daniel asked to move back home just for a while. He was 27 then. I didn't hesitate. I told him he could stay as long as he needed. That's what mothers do. We open our doors. We open our hearts. The first few months were fine. He helped around the house, applied for jobs, even cooked dinner some nights. But something changed. Slowly, subtly. His eyes lingered longer than they should have. His temper flared when I didn't answer the way he liked. I blamed stress. I blamed the economy. I never imagined what was really happening. The first time it happened, I was too shocked to move. I had gone to bed early. My husband, Richard, was out of town visiting his brother. I remember waking up in the middle of the night and knowing, without opening my eyes, that I wasn't alone in the room. I felt the shift in the air, the weight on the mattress, the breath that wasn't mine. I froze. I didn't say a word. I didn't want to believe it. I told myself it was sleep paralysis, a dream, but it wasn't. In the morning, he made eggs. He smiled like nothing had happened. I sat across from him, staring at my plate, wondering if I had imagined it. I wanted to believe I had, but deep down I knew something had changed forever. And from that night forward, peace was something I never found again in my own home. The days after that first night felt like walking on shattered glass. I moved carefully, said little, and tried to pretend I was imagining things. Because what mother wants to admit that her own child crossed a line that should never be crossed? I kept myself busy, cleaned things that didn't need cleaning, rearranged the pantry, avoided eye contact. But every time I walked past him, I felt it, that invisible thread of fear tightening around my chest. He never said a word about that night. Neither did I. And that silence? It was worse than screaming. It made me question my sanity. Richard came back from his trip that Sunday. He hugged Daniel like always and asked if everything went smoothly. I nodded, smiled, lied. Because the truth was too ugly, too shameful. I thought maybe with Richard home, it wouldn't happen again. I thought maybe that nightmare had ended. But I was wrong. That next week, Richard had to start his night shifts again. He worked security at the mill. That meant I was alone in the house with Daniel most nights. And I started locking my bedroom door. At least I tried. But somehow, even locked doors didn't feel like protection anymore. Not when someone you love finds a way to make you feel helpless in your own bed. If you're still with me right now, thank you. These stories, they're not easy to tell, but they're real. And if you or someone you know has ever felt trapped or silenced, please like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to the channel. It helps more people find these stories and maybe, just maybe, gives someone else the courage to speak. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I'd love to know who's out there listening. Sometimes, just knowing someone is listening makes all the difference. There's something shameful about fear, especially when it lives inside your own home. I used to be proud of my strength. I raised a child without ever once thinking I'd have to protect myself from him. But after that second night, when I felt his shadow return while my husband was away, I stopped pretending. I didn't scream. I didn't move. I just waited until it ended, praying to disappear inside my own skin. And when it was over, I lay there frozen, my body still, but my mind screaming. I stared at the ceiling until the sun came up. That morning, I didn't make breakfast. I didn't greet him with a smile. I locked myself in the bathroom and cried into a towel so no one would hear. Then I looked at myself in the mirror and asked, "Why are you letting this happen?" But I didn't have an answer. The truth is, when something like this happens, especially by someone you love, your mind doesn't fight the way people expect. It shuts down. It folds. It survives. I started sleeping with the lights on. I told Richard the first was having nightmares. He kissed my forehead and said, "You've been through so much, Carol. You need rest." I nodded and lied again. Because what else could I do? Daniel noticed. He always noticed. And that made it worse. His eyes would follow me. His words got colder. I started to feel like a prisoner in my own home. The hardest part wasn't the nights, it was the days. Pretending. Cooking. Talking about the weather. Smiling for Richard, because he had no idea the hell I was living in just hours before he came home. No woman should ever have to feel that way in her own house. No mother should ever feel unsafe with her own child. But I did, and I was too ashamed to say a word. At first, the darkness was his disguise. The shadows gave him permission to become someone I didn't recognize. But it didn't take long before that darkness began spilling into the daylight. That was when I knew this wasn't confusion or desperation, this was control. It was deliberate. He stopped knocking on doors. He'd come into the bathroom without warning, pretending he didn't hear the lock. He'd brushed too close when I was cooking, placing his hand on the small of my back like it was normal. His eyes didn't carry the warmth of a sun, they were studying me, reading my silence like a victory. One afternoon, while Richard was asleep after his night shift, Daniel cornered me in the hallway. There was nothing violent, nothing that would look alarming to an outsider. Just a hand pressed against the wall beside my face. But the way he looked at me, it stole my breath. I couldn't speak. I couldn't move. I stood frozen like prey waiting for the predator to pass. Then he smiled and walked away, as if it was a joke. As if none of it mattered. But it did. To me, it did. That evening, I sat across from Richard during dinner and almost told him. I stared at my plate while the words formed in my throat. But then Daniel joined us, laughing about a news story on his phone, and the moment was gone. I wanted to scream, but I stayed silent. Because the truth would destroy everything. It would shatter Richard's heart. And I still loved them both, even the one hurting me. Isn't that the worst part? There's no handbook for this. No clear rules for when love turns into fear. I was drowning in confusion, guilt, and shame, all while smiling through meals and folding laundry like nothing was wrong. To anyone out there who knows this feeling, you are not weak. You are not alone. Please don't wait as long as I did to speak. Silence doesn't protect you, it only protects the person hurting you. There was a night I'll never forget, not because of what Daniel did, but because of what I almost managed to do. It was the night I sat with Richard on the back porch, just the two of us, like we used to in the early years of our marriage. The moonlight was soft, and the breeze smelled like rain was coming. For a moment, I felt like myself again. Safe. I turned to him and said, "Do you ever feel like something's not right, but you can't explain it?" He looked over at me, concerned. He took my hand and asked if I was okay. And I wanted so badly to just say it, to say what was happening. But I couldn't form the words. Instead, I said, "I'm just tired." Daniel's been different. That was my way of reaching out, hoping Richard would see through the cracks. But he didn't. He nodded and said, "He's under a lot of pressure. I'm sure it's just a phase." I wanted to scream, but I didn't. I nodded and looked away. That night, Daniel came into my room again. This time, I felt something different in him. Not guilt, not shame, power. Like he knew I'd tried to speak up and failed. Like he wanted to remind me who was in control. I laid there after he left, staring at the ceiling. My hands clenched in fists beneath the blanket. And I made a decision not to fight yet, not to scream, but to start recording. If I couldn't speak it, maybe I could prove it. The next morning, I searched online for hidden cameras. I didn't know what I was doing, but I knew I had to do something. My silence had protected him long enough. To anyone listening, if your gut tells you something is wrong, don't wait for it to get worse. Please trust yourself. And if you're still watching, it means the story is reaching someone. That means more than you know. Please like, share, and subscribe so others can find this too. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from. It helps me feel less alone in this world. There was a night I'll never forget, not because of what Daniel did, but because of what I almost managed to do. It was the night I sat with Richard on the back porch, just the two of us, like we used to in the early years of our marriage. The moonlight was soft, and the breeze smelled like rain was coming. For a moment, I felt like myself again. Safe. I turned to him and said, "Do you ever feel like something's not right, but you can't explain it?" He looked over at me, concerned. He took my hand and asked if I was okay. And I wanted so badly to just say it, to say what was happening. But I couldn't form the words. Instead, I said, "I'm just tired. Daniel's been different." That was my way of reaching out, hoping Richard would see through the cracks. But he didn't. He nodded and said, "He's under a lot of pressure. I'm sure it's just a phase." I wanted to scream, but I didn't. I nodded and looked away. That night, Daniel came into my room again. This time, I felt something different in him. Not guilt, not shame, power. Like he knew I'd tried to speak up and failed. Like he wanted to remind me who was in control. I laid there after he left, staring at the ceiling. My hands clenched in fists beneath the blanket. And I made a decision not to fight yet, not to scream, but to start recording. If I couldn't speak it, maybe I could prove it. The next morning, I searched online for hidden cameras. I didn't know what I was doing, but I knew I had to do something. My silence had protected him long enough. To anyone listening, if your gut tells you something is wrong, don't wait for it to get worse. Please trust yourself. And if you're still watching, it means the story is reaching someone. That means more than you know. Please like, share, and subscribe so others can find this too. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from. It helps me feel less alone in this world. Every time I walked past that cabinet in the dining room, I felt a small flicker of strength. Tucked behind the porcelain my mother once cherished sat the truth. Cold, undeniable, quietly waiting for the moment I'd finally use it. Daniel had no idea. He kept acting like everything was normal. He'd sit beside me on the couch and pretend we were just a regular family watching TV. He'd lean over to pass me the remote or ask questions I didn't want to answer. Every movement was calculated. Every glance felt like a warning. But I had something now. And I started to change, just a little. My shoulders weren't quite as hunched. My eyes didn't always drop when he spoke. I started locking my door with more confidence. He noticed. One morning, he asked, "You seem different, Mom. Is something wrong?" I smiled politely and said, "Just tired, Daniel." That's all. But I could see it in his eyes, suspicion. Richard, still unaware, tried to keep the peace. He'd often say things like, "I know Daniel's going through a tough time. He just needs more structure." Structure. That's what he thought would fix what was happening in our home. I wanted to scream. I kept the flash drive hidden for 3 more weeks. I didn't tell a soul. I wanted to build the courage to show Richard. But how do you look your husband in the eye and say, "Our son has been hurting me in ways I can't even say out loud"? The burden weighed heavier each day. I started writing a letter, one I never intended to send. Just writing down what I felt, what I had endured. It was the first time I allowed myself to put it in words, even if only on paper. I was afraid to speak. Because I still loved him. Because I didn't want you to hate him. Because I didn't want you to hate me. I left that note tucked between pages of my journal, just in case something ever happened to me. But in the back of my mind, I knew it was only a matter of time before Daniel found the flash drive. Or I used it. I just didn't know which would come first. It was a Friday. Richard had gone on another overnight shift, something he picked up once a month for extra income. I always hated those nights, but this time, I felt a bit more prepared. I had the camera on. I had the flash drive backed up again and hidden in a different place, inside the empty coffee canister no one ever touched. That night, I didn't sleep. I stayed alert, every sense heightened. Around 2 a.m., I heard his footsteps outside my door. He didn't knock. He hadn't knocked in months. He turned the knob, only to find it locked. Then came the silence, the kind that makes your skin crawl. And then, his voice. Calm, cold, too quiet to be casual. "Why are you locking the door now, Mom? Don't you trust me anymore?" I didn't answer. I pressed my hands against the mattress to stop them from shaking. He stayed there for a full minute, maybe more. Then I heard him walk away. But it wasn't over. At breakfast the next morning, he sat down across from me and stared. "I went into your room last night," he said flatly. I looked up, pretending not to understand. "Oh, I know you're hiding something. You've been acting weird. Like you're afraid of me or something." I shrugged. "I just haven't been sleeping well." He leaned in slightly. "You sure that's all it is?" My blood turned to ice, but I didn't flinch. I kept my voice steady. "Yes, that's all." He stared at me for a long time. Then he smiled. That same twisted, smug smile he always used when he thought he had the upper hand. But this time, I smiled back. Because I knew something he didn't. He thought he still owned my silence. He thought I was still that woman who curled into herself and waited for it to be over. But I had my shield now. I had my truth. And I was getting closer to using it. He felt the shift. That's why he started poking at the edges, testing my fear, trying to reclaim what he thought belonged to him. But what he didn't realize was that I was no longer waiting for rescue. I was preparing for war. It was a Friday. Richard had gone on another overnight shift, something he picked up once a month for extra income. I always hated those nights, but this time, I felt a bit more prepared. I had the camera on. I had the flash drive backed up again and hidden in a different place, inside the empty coffee canister no one ever touched. That night, I didn't sleep. I stayed alert, every sense heightened. Around 2 a.m., I heard his footsteps outside my door. He didn't knock. He hadn't knocked in months. He turned the knob, only to find it locked. Then came the silence, the kind that makes your skin crawl. And then, his voice. Calm, cold, too quiet to be casual. "Why are you locking the door now, Mom? Don't you trust me anymore?" I didn't answer. I pressed my hands against the mattress to stop them from shaking. He stayed there for a full minute, maybe more. Then I heard him walk away. But it wasn't over. At breakfast the next morning, he sat down across from me and stared. "I went into your room last night," he said flatly. I looked up, pretending not to understand. "Oh, I know you're hiding something. You've been acting weird. Like you're afraid of me or something." I shrugged. "I just haven't been sleeping well." He leaned in slightly. "You sure that's all it is?" My blood turned to ice, but I didn't flinch. I kept my voice steady. "Yes, that's all." He stared at me for a long time. Then he smiled. That same twisted, smug smile he always used when he thought he had the upper hand. But this time, I smiled back. Because I knew something he didn't. He thought he still owned my silence. He thought I was still that woman who curled into herself and waited for it to be over. But I had my shield now. I had my truth. And I was getting closer to using it. He felt the shift. That's why he started poking at the edges, testing my fear, trying to reclaim what he thought belonged to him. But what he didn't realize was that I was no longer waiting for rescue. I was preparing for war. It was late, well past midnight. I had dozed off on the living room sofa with a blanket over my legs and the TV still murmuring in the background. Richard had come home early from his shift, something he rarely did. He'd had a migraine and couldn't finish the night. He walked in quietly, trying not to wake anyone. I heard the door close, but didn't sit up. I was too tired to move, and honestly, The safety of his presence made me feel like I could finally sleep for real. But then, I heard another set of footsteps. Heavier. Slower. Daniel. I kept my eyes half closed, watching through my lashes. He hadn't realized Richard was home. He walked past the living room, straight toward the hallway that led to my bedroom. As if it was routine. As if he'd done it so many times that it no longer required thought or hesitation. Then Richard's voice, low but sharp, cut through the silence. "Where are you going?" Daniel froze. He turned slowly, caught in the act without understanding the danger of being seen. "I was just going to the kitchen," he said. "At the end of the hall?" Richard stepped closer, squinting. Daniel stuttered. I thought I heard something in Mom's room." Richard frowned. "Why would you be checking her room in the middle of the night?" I could see the confusion on Richard's face, and I could tell. A seed had been planted. Something didn't feel right to him. Daniel shrugged and mumbled something about a noise and walked off, pretending to grab a glass of water. Richard stood in the hallway for a few seconds longer, then turned and looked over at me. I sat up then, heart pounding. "You're home early," I said, forcing a tired smile. "Yeah," he said, eyes still clouded. "Just wasn't feeling great." He didn't mention the strange hallway encounter, but I could tell it was circling in his mind. Quietly, subtly, suspicion had entered his world too. After he went to bed, I sat alone for another hour, thinking. That was the closest we'd come to the truth being exposed. One wrong move, and Daniel might have found himself face to face with his father, no lies to hide behind. But somehow he slipped away again. Like he always did. I knew I couldn't let it keep happening. That moment, watching Richard question his son, changed something in me. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about ending it for good. And I was almost ready. The tension in our home thickened after that night. Richard didn't say much about the hallway encounter, but I could tell it unsettled him. He started waking up during the nights more often, wandering the house quietly, listening. Sometimes he'd check the locks twice, or pretend to get water just to pass the hallway. He was watching, even if he didn't fully understand what he was watching for. And Daniel, he noticed too. He started keeping his door shut more often, keeping his distance from Richard, but not from me. If anything, he became more intense, more careful with his tone, but more threatening with his silence. He didn't have to say a word. I could feel the resentment building behind his eyes. He knew I had changed, and he didn't like it. I started testing small ways to prepare for what was coming. During dinner one night, I mentioned an old friend from church who worked with trauma victims. I said her name casually, as if recalling a memory. Richard nodded, interested. "Daniel?" He flinched. Just slightly, but I caught it. Another day, I accidentally left a self-help book on trauma ad on the kitchen table. Richard picked it up and flipped through it. "Where'd this come from?" he asked. I told him I borrowed it from the library. I watched Daniel's eyes narrow from across the room. I had his attention now. The following week, I did something bold. I scheduled a private appointment with a counselor. I didn't use insurance. I paid in cash and didn't write it down in any planner. I couldn't take the risk. I needed to speak to someone who didn't know my family, someone who wouldn't look at me like I was crazy for saying the words I couldn't even form out loud. Her name was Elaine. She was in her early 50s, quiet but sharp-eyed. I didn't tell her everything during that first visit. I couldn't, but I gave her enough. Enough for her to sit still, to look at me without judgment, and to say words I hadn't heard in so long it made me cry right there in the chair. "You didn't deserve that." Simple. Steady. Clear. And that was the moment I realized just how much I had convinced myself that maybe I had done something wrong. Maybe I was too soft. Maybe I wasn't strong enough. But no, that wasn't the truth. The truth was I had been preyed upon in my own home. And I had been surviving, not living. After the session, I sat in my car with the windows rolled down, breathing slowly. I held my hands on the steering wheel and whispered to myself, "You're getting closer. Just hold on." That night, Daniel hovered near my room again. But I didn't flinch. I locked the door, closed the blinds, and stared at the ceiling in defiance. He didn't try anything. He knew something had shifted. The power was beginning to tilt. He could feel it. It was a warm afternoon, the kind that used to bring me joy, sun filtering through the windows, the scent of garden soil on the breeze. But that day, the light felt harsh. Everything felt exposed. My nerves were raw, my breath tight. Because that was the day I knew I couldn't carry this story alone any longer. I went back to Elaine's office, just like the week before. But this time, I wasn't afraid to say it. I sat across from her, hands folded tightly in my lap, and said the words I had only whispered in the darkest corners of my mind. "My son." Her eyes didn't widen in judgment. She simply nodded, as if to say, "I'm here. Go on." And I did. I didn't say the unspeakable in direct terms, because even now, the words still choke me, but I said enough. I told her how he crept into my room at night, how he stood over me, how he touched what no son should ever dare touch. I told her how I froze, how I tried to rationalize the madness, how I convinced myself it was a dream until it happened again. And again. Elaine didn't interrupt. She didn't rush me. She let the silence fill the space when it needed to. When I finished, I looked at her, expecting her to look away. But she didn't. "Carol," she said gently, "you've been incredibly brave to survive this. But now you have to ask yourself, do you want to keep surviving or do you want to start living?" That question followed me home like a shadow. That evening, I sat at the dinner table with both Richard and Daniel. The same table where we'd shared birthdays, holidays, and Sunday meals. But nothing felt sacred anymore. I watched them speak to each other, father and son, and I wondered how one could carry so much love for both, yet feel so torn apart. Later that night, I asked Richard a question. If someone in this family were hurting another, what would you do? He looked confused and maybe a little worried. "What do you mean?" "Just hypothetically," I said. "Would you believe the victim? Even if it hurt to believe them?" His answer was immediate. "Of course. I'd believe them. And I'd protect them." I nodded, then went to bed, my heart breaking and healing at the same time. Because now I knew. I had to tell him. I had to show him the truth. The time for hiding was over. I would lose something by speaking. Maybe the illusion of family. Maybe even his trust for a while. But I would finally gain back the one thing I had lost so long ago myself. I didn't sleep that night. I laid in bed staring at the ceiling, going over every word I planned to say. My stomach was tight, my palms damp with fear. I knew what this would do to Richard. He adored our son. He saw the man he raised, not the man I now feared. But he needed to see the truth. The next morning, I waited until Daniel had left for the gym. He always went on Saturdays. Said he liked to clear his mind. What a cruel irony. Richard was in the garage, cleaning his old toolbox, humming a tune from a song I didn't recognize. I stood there in the doorway, clutching the flash drive in my hand so tightly it left indentations in my skin. "I need to talk to you," I said. He looked up, surprised by the firmness in my voice. "Everything okay?" "No, not really." I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I simply handed him the flash drive and said, "Please watch this." In the guest room. Alone. He stared at it, confused. "What is this?" "Just watch it, then come find me." I walked away before he could ask another question. My knees nearly buckled as I reached the kitchen. I sat at the table, staring at the wall, trying to breathe. Minutes passed. Then 10. Then 20. Silence. Every second stretched like a lifetime. And then I heard the door creak open. Richard appeared in the hallway. His face was pale, his hands trembling. "Carol," his voice cracked. I stood up slowly. "You saw it?" He nodded, lips parted but silent. The tears in his eyes were unlike anything I'd seen before, not from sadness alone, but from disbelief. From rage. From guilt. He walked toward me, but stopped short. When did this start?" I shook my head. Too long ago. He covered his face with both hands. I thought he might collapse. He paced the room, muttering to himself. No, no. That's our son. That's our boy. That can't be him. That can't be him. He's not who you think he is, I said softly. Not anymore. He turned to me, eyes bloodshot. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Because I didn't think you'd believe me. Because I couldn't even believe it myself. He dropped into the chair across from me. I'm going to kill him. No, Richard, I said, reaching across the table. You're going to protect me. That's what I need from you now. He looked up, devastated. You have my word. That night, Richard slept in a chair outside my bedroom door. Not because I asked him to, but because he wanted to, and for the first time in a long time. I felt like someone was standing between me and the darkness. I still didn't know what we were going to do next. But I wasn't alone anymore. And that meant everything. The next morning, the house was heavy with silence. I hadn't slept, and neither had Richard. He sat at the kitchen table long before sunrise, still wearing yesterday's shirt, hunched forward with his hands clasped like he was preparing for a war. His eyes were swollen, but not from crying. He was beyond tears now. He was full of fire and disbelief. Daniel came downstairs like he always did, calm, confident, barefoot, and entitled. He poured himself a glass of orange juice and didn't even look at us. That was the moment Richard stood up. Sit down, he said. His voice wasn't loud, but it shook the walls. Daniel turned, confused, then smirked slightly, the way he always did when he thought Richard was being dramatic. What's going on? I said sit down. Daniel sat. Not because he was afraid, he wasn't used to fear, but because something in Richard's tone had changed. I watched the video, Richard said. Daniel froze. That smirk slipped off his face. What video? You know what video. Daniel shifted in his seat. His jaw tensed. He looked at me, then back at his father. She's manipulating you, he said. You don't understand what you saw. I understand enough, Richard said. You've been hurting your mother. For God knows how long. You've been violating this home, this family. Daniel scoffed. You're believing her over me? Richard slammed his hand on the table. Don't you dare speak to her like that. The room trembled with tension. For the first time, I saw fear in Daniel's eyes. Not because he was afraid of punishment, but because he realized something had shifted beyond his control. Richard leaned closer, eyes cold. You're going to pack your things and leave. Today. You're not staying in this house one more night. Daniel stood slowly, defiant. You think you can kick me out? After everything I've done for this family. You didn't build this family, Richard said. You tried to destroy it. Daniel looked at me one last time. His gaze wasn't apologetic, it was resentful. He'd lost control, and he hated me for it. He walked away without another word. By noon, his room was empty. He didn't say goodbye. He didn't leave a note. He simply vanished. And when the door shut behind him, I collapsed into Richard's arms. I didn't cry from sadness, I cried from relief. Because he was gone. Because for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid to sleep in my own home. We didn't talk much that day. We didn't need to. The air felt lighter. Safer. But we both knew the wounds he left behind would take time to heal. Still, the nightmare had finally been broken. And now, it was time to begin again. The house was quiet. Not just in sound, but in spirit. There were no footsteps pacing outside my door, no whispers in the hallway, no dread building in my chest as the sun went down. Daniel was gone, and I should have felt victorious. I should have felt peace. But I didn't. Freedom isn't the same as healing. And when someone takes from you what Daniel took from me, there is no quick recovery. There is only survival, followed by silence, followed by slowly remembering who you were before it all began. Richard tried to be gentle with me. He started calling me honey again, just like he did when we first married. He made coffee before I woke up, folded laundry, stayed close, but never too close. I could see the sorrow in his eyes. He wasn't just mourning the son he thought he had. He was mourning the man he thought he was, the father who believed he had done everything right. We tiptoed around the subject at first. There were no family photos on the mantle anymore. Richard quietly boxed up Daniel's things, clothes, books, old school awards, and stored them in the attic. Not a word was said about it. But I noticed, and it meant something. That week, Elaine, the counselor, called to check on me. I didn't answer the first time. I wasn't ready to say the words again. But on her second call, I picked up. I told her everything. The flash drive, the confrontation, the empty room. And then, for the first time, I told her what I felt. "I'm relieved," I said. "But I'm also broken." She didn't correct me. She didn't say, "No, Carol, you're strong." She let me feel what I needed to feel. And then she said something I've never forgotten. Broken is a place, not a destination. You won't live there forever. Those words carried me through the days that followed. I began writing again, something I hadn't done in years. Not just journals, but letters. Letters to the version of myself who had suffered in silence. I wrote to her like a friend. I told her she was brave, that she held the line, that she never gave up. Some days, I read them aloud in the quiet of my room, as if the walls needed to hear my voice too. As if the silence needed to be replaced with truth. And little by little, I began to feel whole again. Not healed. Not yet. But whole enough to breathe. Whole enough to look out the window and feel the sun without shrinking. Daniel had taken so much from me, but he didn't take me. I was still here, and I was learning how to live again. It didn't take long for people to notice that Daniel was gone. Neighbors talk, especially in quiet places like ours, where families wave from porches and gossip is dressed up as concern. One day, our next-door neighbor, Nancy, casually asked while trimming her hedges, "Haven't seen your son around lately. He okay?" I paused. My hands were in the soil, planting tulips near the walkway, something I hadn't done in years. It used to be my favorite spring ritual before the darkness crept in. Now I found myself relearning how to enjoy it. I looked up and said with a gentle smile, "He's staying somewhere else now." It was time. She nodded, uncertain, probably sensing something deeper but choosing not to pry. I was grateful for that. I wasn't ready for the world to know. It was enough that Richard did. Enough that I finally did. But the whispers didn't stop there. A few people from church reached out. One of the women who ran the food pantry left a message. "If you need anything, Carol, anything at all, we're here." It was kind, but it stung. I hadn't been at church in months. Daniel had insisted I rest on Sundays. He never liked me being around other people. Now I saw it for what it was, isolation. He'd quietly removed me from my own life, one excuse at a time. And I had let him. But that was over. I decided to return to church the following Sunday. I wore a pale blue dress I hadn't touched in years, and Richard walked beside me, silent but strong. He hadn't stepped foot inside the church in over a decade, but he didn't let go of my hand. Not once. When we walked in, a few heads turned. There were no harsh stares, just curious eyes, wondering what had changed. The service felt familiar, but distant, like a song I once loved, but had forgotten the words to. And yet, something about being in that space, surrounded by voices raised in prayer, made me feel steadier, braver. Afterward, a woman I hadn't spoken to in ages approached me. Her name was Patricia. She was older, quieter, always kind. She placed a hand gently on my arm and said, "I don't know what you've been through, but I can see it in your eyes. You survived something, and you don't have to carry it alone." I nodded. I couldn't speak. My throat closed up, but I think she understood. That night, I wrote in my journal, "I was invisible for too long. I wore pain like perfume, quiet and constant. But people are starting to see me again. And maybe, just maybe, I'm starting to see myself." The whispers in the neighborhood would continue. People would guess, speculate, wonder. But the truth? That belonged to me. And I was learning how to live without hiding. The healing came in waves. Some days I felt strong enough to clean out the closets, to open windows, to wear colors that weren't beige or gray. Other days, I barely got out of bed, weighed down by memories that struck without warning. A scent, a sound, a shadow at the wrong angle, small things became triggers I hadn't expected. It was during one of those fragile mornings that I decided to write Daniel a letter. Not to send, not to forgive, but to free myself. I sat at the kitchen table with my old stationery, the one with pressed flowers on the corners, and I began. The words didn't flow easily at first. My hand trembled. My breath felt uneven. But once the first line appeared on the page, everything inside me broke open. You were my son, my only child, and I loved you in a way only a mother can. But you broke something sacred. You twisted love into fear, and you took from me what you never had the right to touch. I wrote about the nights I lay awake in terror. I wrote about the mornings I smiled through tears, pretending everything was fine. I told him how deeply I hated what he had done and how long I hated myself for letting it go on. You made me feel like I was no longer human, like I was a possession, not a mother, not a woman. But I want you to know, what you did to me does not define who I am. I told him about the flash drive, about the moment I finally showed Richard. I described the look in his father's eyes, the disbelief, the heartbreak, the fury. And I let him know that we chose to survive without him. You are not welcome in this home again. Not now. Not ever. I do not owe you forgiveness. I do not owe you silence. What I owe is to myself, and I will never again be the woman who kept your secrets for you. By the end of the letter, my hand was sore and my chest ached. But something inside me felt different. Lighter. I folded the pages and sealed them in an envelope. Then I placed it in the same drawer where I once kept the flash drive. A different kind of evidence now, not for a court, but for my own soul. Richard came home later that afternoon and found me sitting quietly at the table. He didn't ask what I had written. He just placed a hand on my shoulder and said, "Whatever it is, I'm proud of you." That night, I slept for 7 hours without waking. It wasn't just the silence that comforted me, it was the knowledge that I had taken another step toward reclaiming my voice. The damage Daniel caused will always live in the cracks of my memory. But those cracks? They don't mean I'm broken anymore. They're proof I survived. It had been nearly 3 months since Daniel left the house. 3 long, shifting months where the silence he left behind grew from something suffocating to something sacred. My days began to settle into peace again. Gardening in the morning, warm tea at noon, long walks with Richard at dusk. But the damage, it still echoed. Then, one Thursday afternoon, the phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something in my gut said to pick it up. "Hello," I said, my voice calm but guarded. There was a pause on the other end, a breath, then a voice I hadn't heard in weeks. "Mom." My stomach twisted. It was Daniel. I didn't say anything at first. I stared out the window, hand gripping the receiver like it could bite. He began. "I wanted to say I've been thinking about what happened. About you." Still, I said nothing. Let him speak. "I didn't realize how much I hurt you. I've been seeing someone. A counselor. They're making me look at things. Things I buried. Things I did." There was another pause. "I was messed up, Mom. I am messed up. But I'm trying. I'm not asking to come home. I know I can't. I needed to tell you that I'm sorry." Sorry. That word felt like ash in my mouth. Too little. Too late. Too hollow. "Are you there?" he asked. "I'm here," I said, voice steady. "But I'm not the same mother you remember. And I don't owe you comfort for your pain." He was quiet again. "I just needed to say it," he whispered. "Then you've said it," I replied. "But that doesn't change what you did. You took pieces of me I will never get back. You don't get to be part of my healing." He didn't argue. "Okay," he said softly. "I understand." And then he hung up. I sat there for a long time, staring at the receiver in my lap. waiting for the shame, waiting for guilt to creep back in. But it didn't. Instead, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Closure. I had faced the voice that once controlled me. I had listened without trembling. I had stood my ground without raising my voice. And I realized something important. He could still speak. But I no longer had to listen. After the call, something inside me settled. Not in a soft, comforting way, but in a final, unshakable way. I realized I had spent so much of my life as a role: mother, wife, caregiver, peacemaker. But I had forgotten the woman beneath it all. I wanted her back. I began waking up each day with a small new ritual. Before I made coffee or checked the garden or turned on the news, I looked in the mirror and said my name aloud, not the one others used, but the one I gave myself. Survivor. It wasn't about pretending I was strong every moment. It was about claiming the truth that I had lived through something horrific and still chose to rise. I started journaling more regularly, filling entire pages with memories, not just of the trauma, but of who I had been before. I wrote about the young girl who loved to dance barefoot in the rain, the woman who once painted sunsets on old glass jars, the mother who believed in bedtime stories and gentle hands. She was still inside me, bruised, maybe, but not broken. Richard noticed the change too. One morning over breakfast, he smiled across the table and said, "You're humming again." I hadn't realized it. I had been folding napkins and softly humming an old lullaby I used to sing when Daniel was a baby, the same lullaby I had silenced for years. I looked up at Richard and gave him a small, real smile. "I think I'm coming back." He nodded, eyes soft. "You've never left, Carol. You were just hiding for a while. We didn't talk much after that. We didn't need to. There's a quiet kind of love between two people who have survived something together. It doesn't need loud declarations. It just exists, in the way he held my hand during storms, in the way I left notes by the coffee pot with small hearts at the end." I also started connecting with other women, slowly, quietly, through support groups online and later, in person. Women who had stories like mine, stories no one wanted to hear, stories no one believed. And together, we found strength. We didn't need to explain everything in detail. We understood the silences between the words. One woman, a retired teacher named Gloria, said something I'll never forget. "When you reclaim your name, you reclaim your story. And when you reclaim your story, you reclaim your life." So I wrote my story down, every chapter, every ugly truth and quiet victory. Not for pity, not for revenge, but for someone like me, out there right now, who hasn't found their voice yet. And I signed it not just as Carol, but as survivor, because that's who I am now. And no one, not even my own blood, can take that away from me again. It took me nearly a year after Daniel left to do it. To stand in front of a room, not full of strangers, but of women like me, and open my mouth without choking on the shame. Shame that didn't belong to me. Fear that wasn't mine to carry. Pain that had no business growing inside someone who only ever gave love. The community center had folding chairs in a circle and soft lighting. The kind of space that tried its best to feel safe. I sat in silence for the first 3 meetings, listening to others talk. Their stories were different, some worse, some different kinds of wrong, but the thread of betrayal was the same. So was the silence, the hiding, the loneliness. And then, on the 4th meeting, something in me rose up. I stood, heart pounding like a drum inside my chest, and I told them. Not the details, they didn't need that, but the truth. I was hurt by someone I gave life to, I said. Someone I taught to walk, to speak, to love, and somewhere along the way, he turned my love into something twisted, and I let myself believe it was my fault. I stayed silent for years because I thought no one would believe me, because I thought maybe I had done something to deserve it. I paused then, the room quiet and warm, every eye locked on me. But I know now I did nothing wrong. Nothing. I survived something unthinkable. And I'm still here. I'm here, and I'm not hiding anymore. There were tears. From me. From others. A few reached for my hand, not out of pity, but solidarity. Afterward, one woman pulled me aside. Her hands were trembling, her voice barely a whisper. "Thank you," she said. "I haven't told anyone what happened to me, but I think I will now." That was the moment I knew why I had to tell this story. not to punish Daniel. Life will do that. He'll live with the truth he created, not to hurt Richard. He's already carried enough guilt, though he never should have. But to remind every woman like me, every mother, wife, sister, daughter, who was ever silenced, manipulated, or stripped of her dignity, that your voice still matters, that your story is still yours, that survival is not the end. It's the beginning. Today, I sit in the garden outside my kitchen window, watching the wind dance through the tulips. The same hands that once shook with fear now hold a journal, a cup of tea, a new life. Daniel is gone, but I am still here, and I am no longer afraid. Thank you for listening to my story. If you found strength, comfort, or truth in these chapters, please like, share, and subscribe to this channel. You never know who might need these words today. And if you feel safe, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. You are not alone. We are never alone when we speak.